Someone just called the vice president of Zimbabwe a traitor in writing with their name attached, not anonymously, not through a leaked document, not in a whispered conversation that someone overheard publicly, deliberately, with language so sharp it could cut through steel. And what this letter reveals about what is really happening inside Zimbabwe's ruling party is more explosive than anything that has been said out loud in years. We have been building to this moment for weeks. Chiwenga's toxic warning, Mbalekwa's expulsion, Mutsvangwa's press conference declaring Mnangagwa unchallenged, Togarepi admitting CAB 3 is not a done deal, court challenges from two directions, a party eating itself alive while publicly insisting everything is fine. And now, a letter from a man named Devin Mafa, chairman of the Zambezia Economic Movement. And what he has written about Constantino Chiwenga is the kind of thing that changes the temperature of an entire political crisis. Not gradually, immediately. The letter was released on Monday, and it opened with a sentence that Zimbabwe had simply never seen directed at a sitting vice president in recent memory. The time for subtlety is over. 6 words. And with those 6 words, Devin Mafa signaled that whatever came next would not be wrapped in the careful, layered, diplomatic language that Zimbabwean political figures use when they want to say something without quite saying it. This was going to be direct, personal, precise. He called Chiwenga's continued tenure treason. Treason, not a mistake, not a miscalculation, not a political disagreement. Treason, the word that in most legal systems carries the heaviest possible weight. The accusation reserved for acts against the state itself. He said Chiwenga's continued presence in government is turning Zimbabwe into a barracks. A barracks. Not a republic. Not a democracy. Not a developmental state. A barracks. A military installation. A place governed by command rather than constitution. By rank rather than rights. By the authority of the uniform rather than the will of the people. Those are not casual words. That is a portrait, a specific, deliberate, devastating portrait of what Mafa believes Chiwenga's continued presence in Zimbabwe's highest office represents. But the letter does not stop at accusation. It goes deeper, into territory that explains not just what Chiwenga is accused of doing now, but what allegedly happened in the most consequential political moment of Zimbabwe's recent history. According to Mafa's letter, when the military intervened and Robert Mugabe's 37-year rule came to its sudden, dramatic end, Chiwenga had a choice. A real, concrete, available choice that was his to make. He could have become president. According to the letter, the opportunity was there. The military had moved. The old order had collapsed. The space for new leadership had opened. And Chiwenga, the man who commanded the forces that created that space, declined to step into it. Not because he lacked the power, not because the moment was not his, because of pressure from regional leaders, SADC, Southern African governments watching the intervention with alarm, leaders who would not accept a military commander stepping directly from the barracks into the presidency, who demanded that civilian structures be observed even in the aftermath of what was effectively a coup. And so Chiwenga stepped back, he accepted the vice presidency, he facilitated Mnangagwa's rise to the top, and according to Mafa's reading of that arrangement, he did so with an expectation that eventually the path to the presidency would lead back to him. That the vice presidency was not a destination, it was a waiting room. But Mafa says the political landscape has shifted dramatically since then. That what Chiwenga was promised, or what he believed he was promised, is not what he is being offered now. And that the gap between those two things, that space between the expectation of 2017 and the reality of 2026, is the engine driving everything Zimbabwe is currently living through. The CAB3 battle, the 2030 agenda, the succession war, the toxic warnings, the expulsions, the press conferences declaring Mnangagwa unchallenged. All of it, according to this letter, traces back to one unresolved question. What does Constantino Chiwenga do with an expectation that is not being fulfilled? Now, here is the dimension of this letter that makes it genuinely extraordinary and deeply complicated. Mafa's argument is that Chiwenga's continued presence, his visible positioning, his quiet opposition to CAB3 from inside the government is actually providing the justification that Mnangagwa's loyalists need to push CAB3 through. Read that carefully, because it is counterintuitive and it is important. He is saying that the threat of a military-backed succession struggled the fear that Chiwenga might move, might challenge, might use his institutional networks to contest the presidency, is the very argument being used to justify extending Mnangagwa's tenure. We cannot have an election, we cannot have a transition, we cannot allow the constitutional cycle to run its course because Chiwenga is waiting, because the military's loyalty is uncertain, because stability requires certainty, and certainty requires keeping the current arrangement in place. CAB3 is the insurance policy against the threat that Chiwenga represents, and Chiwenga's continued presence is the justification for the insurance policy, which means in Mafa's reading of this crisis, Chiwenga and the CAB3 faction are locked in a mutually reinforcing dynamic, each one's existence justifying the other's actions, each one's ambitions feeding the other's fears. An Ouroboros of political survival eating itself in a circle, and ordinary Zimbabweans are trapped in the middle, watching two power centers use each other's existence as the reason nothing can change. That is the hidden machinery of this crisis. And Mafa just described it in public, with his name on the document. Zimbabwe has exploded over this letter. Multiple reactions are running simultaneously, and they are pulling in completely different directions. The first reaction is that this letter is itself a political weapon. That Mafa and the Zambezi economic movement are not disinterested observers calling for accountability. That this is a calculated move by a faction aligned with the Mnangagwa camp to publicly delegitimize Chiwenga ahead of the CAB3 vote. To frame his opposition to the bill not as principled constitutional concern, but as personal ambition, as destabilization, as treason.